Hello, 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 and welcome to the Scouse Science Podcast. My name is Professor Tom Solomon. I'm here at the University of Liverpool. I'm joined today by Michael Buerk and Holly Ellis. Say hello, guys.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you both. And here at the University of Liverpool, I'm Professor of Neurology and Director of the UK's Emerging Infections Research Unit. Now, we'll come to you in a moment, Michael, but Holly first. How was your week?
Yeah, it's been okay. We've introduced a new test in my work, so we've been really busy with that as usual, but glad to be here today.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. Holly, as regulars will know, Holly is a lab scientist here at the Women's Hospital in Liverpool. She's a real Scouse scientist and she's passionate about encouraging more young women into science. And her job today is to keep an eye on all of your comments on Facebook and the Zoom webinar. So we'll see you a bit later on, Holly. And we need to just do a bit of housekeeping just to let people know that you can chat with us on the Zoom chat function or also on Facebook. And we always like to see if it's working. So please post, just say something in the chat now, if you would. Tell us where you're watching from and tell us whether you're a first timer or a repeat offender. And Holly will also, as we're going along, please feed in any questions you have for Michael or any comments or questions for me, and we'll feed these into our mix. We've had now nearly 40,000 people watch our previous episodes. And if you want to catch up with them, this is our 8th one. You can find them on your normal podcast supplier. And when you get there, please rate, review and subscribe to the Scouse Science Podcast. Good. Well, let's go on now and meet Michael properly. So, Michael, do you have any podcasts of your own? I suspect you probably do.
Yeah, I do a radio program on Radio 4 called The Moral Maze, and I think that's a podcast.
That does come out as a podcast.
Yeah,
of course.
No, I like the idea. You know,
okay.
I like to be able to control these things, and you know,
well,
I'm of a generation where you'd wait a week for a television program. You know, now you can binge and do all these things.
Well, let me just give everyone a bit more background. I'm sure everybody on the call or listening knows you, but you're from Solihull and you worked initially on local newspapers and then the Daily Mail. And I think you started with the BBC in 1972, first of all, radio and then television. And you've worked on, I think, nearly 70 locations around the world, 70 countries around the world, more than a dozen wars, been jailed, blown up, shot at and gassed during the course of your assignment. So today will be a walk in the park for you, I think.
I'm not so sure, actually, Tom. There's a glint in your eye. I'm getting rather worried about.
I know. I must warn people that in our little chat, in our green room chat beforehand, you were worried that we're all being terribly friendly and that we might hit you hard with some tough questions. Well, we'll see how it goes. Maybe the tough questions will come from our listeners.
It could be, and it's very unsettling, actually, to be on the other side of these sort of conversations. Normally, normally interviewing's dead easy. All you've got to do is think up a question, then the other poor person has to kind of work out the answer. It's more difficult.
Yeah, because I did notice in doing my homework, we always do a bit of homework, and there were surprisingly few interviews with you or occasions when you were on the receiving end. Have you had bad experiences in the past?
Not really. I just oddly, because of course, once you fall in amongst your colleagues in some way, they do rough you up. They don't take any prisoners, and so well, maybe, but no, I can't honestly say I've been deeply wounded, but I'm terribly suspicious. I've seen what goes on, you see.
Well, we'll try to live up to your expectations. I hadn't planned to. It's just meant to be a nice, gentle chat. Let me also just remind people that, because I haven't quite finished my introduction, and maybe it's a bit long, you can send me notes afterwards. But of course, the thing for which you're most well known, the reporting for which you're most well known was the 1984 Ethiopian famine, where your 2 films on that raised awareness enormously and led to policy changes. BandAid, Live Aid, I think you invented Bob Geldof. And of course, this went on to, this was the forerunner for things like comic relief, children in need. Billions were pledged in aid. And I understand, again, I didn't know this, but I learned this, that Bill Gates set up the Gates Foundation, partly having seen your film. Was that your finest hour?
Well, I don't know, really. It's... I've always felt very uncomfortable about it, really, because it's getting credit for other people's misery. Really, it's a strange situation. I remember at the time it won a lot of awards, and I kept getting invited to awards ceremonies, which were always at banquets or big dinners or something. And I was pretty arrogant and thick-skinned, but the irony wasn't totally lost on me, or the discomfort, really.
I saw also, I think, did I see that among your many awards, the James Cameron Prize for reporting in South Africa, but also did you win a Science Writer of the Year award as well?
I did, yes. It was for it was for a series of documentaries about the destruction of the environment in Eastern Europe, specifically in Poland around Zabrze. And there was almost catastrophic, I'm probably overstating it, but certainly for the people involved, catastrophic environmental pollution there, which had led to real outbreaks, a really high proportion of children who were born damaged as a result of that. I mean, it did make quite an impact. And in fact, a couple of charities were started up when the programs were shown that are still going, though I think they've morphed into something a little wider now.
And of course, the other, science interaction that all of us are having and can't avoid is the pandemic. I was interested in how that's impacted on you and your work.
Well, my work is in as far as broadcasting is concerned anyway, is either going out filming sort of factual documentaries of one sort or another, popular history these days as well, which is pretty good fun. So obviously it's had an impact on that. I was lucky actually, and in that period in August, late July, August and September, where people looking back had thought it was kind of over. And it was sunshine, and the filming started going again. And I filmed a series then, yet another series about the Second World War. So I did that filming, but the filming was really, really stopped and ground to a halt, really. And that filming that is being done in really quite strange ways. I've been, reading in the newspapers about. They have these people who have to deal with the sex scenes in dramas, and they have various people who have to organize these them in a safe and reasonable way and all that sort of stuff. And you're wondering how they do the sex scenes with in a COVID aware way. It's a bit of a digression, but filming even factual documentaries in the COVID times is terribly difficult because filming, and indeed the Moral Maze, which is the program I do live on Radio 4, it's almost tactile. You certainly need to see the whites of everybody else's eyes, but also perhaps the aerosol of their potential COVID exhalations.
Yeah, I was on your Moral Maze program about vaccinations, the morality of vaccinations, a few months back, and it certainly felt easier. So that we did that down the line, and whereas before that I'd done Question Time on BBC television, and we were in the studio, and it is a hell of a lot easier actually. If you're at home, you've sort of got your defences, you've got access to things if you need them. You feel less exposed than you do, in a studio.
Yes, that's one of the problems, I suppose, with doing the Moral Maze, is we're having to do it now with us all in our own little silos. Is because it's meant to be a bear pit almost, a reasonably intellectually upmarket bear pit, but a place where people's attitudes and views and theories are tested, maybe even to destruction. And you kind of need, first of all, to do it live. We can't do it live anymore because of the difficulties of the connections. That gives it a danger and an edge, I think. But also you need to see the whites of their eyes. You need to see the body language. You need to, to make it work. So it's not just an inconvenience. It's a bit of a struggle, to be honest.
Have you thought of doing it like this? So we're doing this via Zoom, so we can see each other, pick up on body language. We're recording separately. In fact, you were showing us off earlier on. Just show everyone who's watching your enormous microphone. Look at this. Look at this. This is a real pro.
What do you think?
And he's not, I mean, that's not just because he's holding it close to the camera. It's absolutely enormous.
It is rather big, yes. All right. Do I detect a little bit of microphone envy?
Oh, indeed. Look at my pathetic little thing here.
I know. It is very teeny.
Yes. But you could do those programs.
Disadvantage, Tom. Honestly,
No.
I can hear you clearly. Don't worry.
Yeah. Is this a trick to try and put me off? We were talking about. I mean, the other thing is, today people will have noticed the format's a bit different. We've just got Michael, and because he is himself a journalist, we thought we would allow him to ask questions of me along the way, and I know he has some thoughts about how the UK has responded to the COVID pandemic. So, although you've said I'm interviewing you, I think we're hoping for a conversation, which is, of course, what you get with podcasts that you don't with many other media, because you've got the time to chat. I mean, you mentioned the summer. Are there any particular things you'd like to ask about the summer in relation to COVID, when, like you say, everyone thought it was all over?
There are just the odd layman's questions. I mean, you're a scientist. Why? There's dozens of them, really. Don't get me started, I suppose. But why is it impossible? Why has it been impossible or taken so long, if anybody has actually ruled on this at all, to work out whether face masks are a good thing or a bad thing?
That is a good question. I'll tell you why it's taken a long time, because it relates to how you get the evidence, the type of evidence. So if I grab one of my face masks here, it's all to do with the type of study. So I might be able to do a study where I show if I put my face mask on and cough and splutter, less of my cough and splutter hits the screen. I could have something capturing it on the screen than if I didn't have it on. So and if I actually had the COVID now at the time, you could even measure the virus and find that there was less virus hitting the screen. So you would think, well, in theory, that means it's a good thing to do. But then you have to remember that actually, what am I going to do with this face mask? Well, I'm going to fiddle with it, touch it. I'm not going to, in hospitals, we're very careful. They go in a bin, you wash your hands. I think all of us who use face masks day to day realize that you're fiddling with them constantly. And so then you have to say, okay, well, I've put the virus, this mask has caught the virus, but now the virus, I'm touching it with my hands. And if I don't wash my hands and then I go and touch a door handle, am I passing it on in a different way? So you'll see the only way you could really know, does wearing face masks have an impact on transmission, is some kind of randomized trial where half the people wore them and half didn't. And you can't really do those kind of studies. So then you have to say, well, let's compare the data from countries that did use face masks from the start with those that didn't. And again, those comparisons are quite hard to make because there's so many other things going on. But I think the weight of evidence now suggests that what we first thought, which was that direct contact was the most important means of transmitting the virus. The evidence now suggests that that's not so important. And there are more and more data showing that there is virus in tiny amounts in what we breathe out, and therefore the masks could catch it. So I mean, that's it's a good question because it's a really hard scientific question to answer, and that's why there's been uncertainty over it.
The other thing that you've got me going now.
No, don't worry, it's fine. I'll jump back in when I need to. You keep going.
All right.
As long as I'm in charge, you can keep going.
Yeah, no, you're in charge, Tom. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I was quite surprised to read. I think it was in the Times that had done a special analysis through Public Health England of the third wave of coronavirus. And the statistics just seemed a surprise to me because there were certain things you kind of accept in the continuing narrative of the COVID virus. One of them was black and minority ethnic people, the extent to which they are disproportionately at risk from and suffering from this, and yet the figures don't actually seem to bear this out, do they? I mean, at least as far as deaths are concerned. I mean, I made a note of them here because I hoped I'd have the opportunity of asking you. In the first wave, apparently 84%, according to the Times analysis of the figures, 84% of the deaths were white. And this compares to around 85% of the population being white, so almost exactly reflecting the ethnic makeup of the population as a whole. But in the third wave, 89% of the deaths were white people. So actually, black and minority ethnic people, at least as far as deaths are concerned, are, if anything, less affected.
Well, we'll come to that, but let me give a preamble by saying, of course, when I am being interviewed on the BBC, they usually give us a heads up of what's coming up, so that we, I can look at in detail and see exactly what's coming up. But we're living and learning as we go, so I haven't had a heads up about this at all. But I think I can help answer the question. Just in terms of the statistics, the simple statistics. So if I told you that the proportions were the same, let's say 90% white and black, or black and ethnic minority, but actually the white population were all over 85, whereas the black and ethnic population were all age 45, you'd realize then we had a problem. And so I don't know the exact data that you're quoting, but the overall data, I think, do show that the minority groups are at increased risk of getting the infection. But then the second, and that therefore, there's two questions. Are there increased risk of getting the infection? And then are there increased risk of dying if they get the infection? And we think there are several things contributing to their increased risk of getting infection. And that's possibly to do with social factors and people living in large family groups and perhaps in smaller premises, etc. That might give you an increased risk of getting it. And then an increased risk of dying. There may well be genetic factors contributing to that, but there are lots of different data. So I think,
I understand that, and I would expect that even if there were no, how can I put this, sort of biological reason for people from black and ethnic minority ethnic communities suffering disproportionately, for social reasons, they are perhaps disproportionately overrepresented in the kind of jobs that are meet the public more often. There's that argument. But are you saying that a possible reason for this is that although they might be more vulnerable to catching it, the fact that they perhaps the way the ages of their sector of the population pan out, that they are on average, if you like, younger than?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not saying
that. The argument?
Well, no, because I said I haven't seen the data that you're talking about.
Just wondering what.
But I'm just trying to explain how data could, at the face of it, it could seem that there's an equal split. Equal proportions, but then when you dig in, you find actually that there are inequalities because of, for example, different ages, etc. But I'm going to take charge at this point and move us on. You did say earlier things about the NHS response, the public response. You had some quite interesting ideas about how people were responding, not earlier in this interview, but things I've heard from you before.
I think I think I suppose with my moral maze hat on, the whole thing has raised all sorts, I think, of really interesting questions about us and the way we live now and our attitudes now. It really brought them to a head, and I mean, it's fantastic from the program's point of view, because we've got so many subjects we can do. But things like our attitude to risk, for instance, which is an attitude towards the balance between rationality, analysis, if you like, and emotion. All the kerfuffle, Lord Sumption, I think, was tended to be at the heart of it a bit recently. But that fundamental thing about the value you put on human life, I find all that sort of thing absolutely fascinating. I find trying to reconcile the idea that the Christian religious idea, if you like, that every life is of equal value, with the obvious, difficult, rational decisions that have to be made when resources are limited and demand, life-saving demand on them isn't. These are the kind of things that I find, absolutely fascinating.
Mm. Well, I can see we've got some really interesting questions coming in on the chat. So Holly, why don't you join us? I usually give her a little heads up, actually, which I haven't done today. But if you're ready for it, Holly, tell us what have people been saying out there?
Okay, so first of all, when you were asking where everyone's watching from, we've gone global this week because there's someone watching in Malaysia and someone watching in Texas. Kate Robinson on Facebook said she was watching from Texas. And then a lot of people from Liverpool, including Roger Phillips, who I don't know whether that's our Roger Phillips or because he was on your podcast, wasn't he, previously?
Roger was on the very first one, yeah. And we tend to find, it does happen. Do you know, Michael, Roger Phillips of BBC Radio Merseyside? He's been the sort of anchor, perhaps a bit like you've been the anchor on BBC News for many years, although he has recently retired. I don't know if you've come across him.
His name definitely resonates.
Yeah, his voice resonates actually as well. He's got a fantastic voice. Holly, what else?
So from Facebook, Jeff Consul is asking about the latest data that Michael was talking about. He said some of the latest data from the coronavirus deaths and infection show pockets of the country where high ethnic groups live there. Could it be a communication issue as well as a cultural issue?
Yeah, I think the now as we're getting control, I think there have been issues getting people to do the isolation and the various tiers, etc., the lockdowns, and now also issues about getting people vaccinated. So there are challenges, I think, around ethnicity, even simple things like language and people understanding. So I do think that's playing into it as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Then another question from Jan Moretta on Zoom is asking about the vaccines. So she said, what is your opinion on mixing the vaccines? A question to you, Tom. So I think that's probably regarding the fact that if you have the I've been lucky enough to have the vaccine because I'm work in the NHS, so we're kind of high on the list of priority, and I've had the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, so now it's compulsory that I get the same one the second time. So why is that?
At the moment, because that's the studies that were done were, one shot, second shot of the same vaccine. But actually, there's a new study going to be done out of Oxford of 800 people who are going to get different combinations of Pfizer, then Oxford, then Pfizer, etc. And that will answer the question about the impact of that on the immune response. It won't look at how many people get disease, but it will look at what their immune responses are. Michael, have you managed to, I'm not sure how old you are. You don't look a day over 21, but maybe that's maybe that's your lens. But have you might have a great,
very low.
Go on.
It's a very low blow. If you were in a roundabout way asking me, have I had my jab? Yes, I had it on Saturday. I skipped down to Guildford High Street and a Superdrug, and a charming young woman jabbed me in the arm, and I skipped all the way back again. And I was terribly pleased. And I've actually got an appointment for, I don't know, 11 weeks hence. But I'm interested in all this as well, and the mix and match with the vaccines. And the Russian vaccine seems having people being sort of perhaps politely rather sniffy about the Russian and the Chinese vaccines when they were sort of theoretical, if you know what I mean, seem to be coming through on the rails as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the thing about the Russian one was the reason why people were sniffy was because they licensed it before they'd done any of the phase 3 studies, which is a really unusual thing to do. And that's because they wanted to be the first to license. But now that the data are coming in from it, and it uses very similar technology to the Oxford one, and those data look good, which I think is a good thing, of course. There's a question for you here, Michael, from John Quinn. What's been your proudest moment on television? It says television, but let's say television or radio.
Well, that's difficult. Again, I suppose the Ethiopian thing, because of, you know, it had an impact, you know, a measurable and visible impact, and I suppose, you know, the trouble with a lot of journalism and a lot of television journalism is that you'd never know whether it's been for you, the results of it have been beneficial or otherwise. You know, quite sometimes you end up doing things and reporting things you'd rather you hadn't at the end of the day, and that was sort of in a sense unequivocal. And I was also really fortunate to be the BBC correspondent in South Africa in the final meltdown of apartheid. And it's a very rare thing to be dealing with a really vexed international issue, which is morally well, to my mind, morally unambiguous. And institutionalized racial prejudice, it struck me, was morally unambiguous, and that was a rare thing to be able to do. But on a lighter side, what I'm particularly proud about, I was doing the 10 o'clock news on Oscars night. And my friend Rosie Millard was delivering her piece at the end of the Oscars in a truly stunning dress with absolutely magnificent, how can I put this, embonpoint, I think is the, she, you know, the dress was, you know, there or thereabouts, if you know what I mean. It was a very striking image. And normally I can think of a good joke far too late, but just in time. And my back announcement to her, that was Rosie Millard reporting in the best supporting dress, which I absolutely hugging myself for days afterwards.
Was that on the 9 o'clock news?
10 o'clock news, I think. Yes.
10 o'clock news. Right.
Yes,
okay.
yes. Yeah.
Well, that's yeah.
It was a good joke, don't you think, Tom?
I think it's very good. Very good.
Even Rosie thought it was. Well, Rosie was very good fun. You know, she sort of collapsed at the time. So it was in every sense very fetching, I thought. Mm.
All right. Well, we'll let Holly go back to keep an eye on the messages and comments that come in, and I'll just ask you a bit more about. I mean, did I see that you'd done the jungle? What's it called? Get Me Out of Here. I'm a celebrity. Get me out of here. Did you do that?
Tom, that is very much like a High Court judge saying, "What is this Twitter?" It's
the pressure. Just remember, you'll know this, but I think people have to understand this. When you're under the pressure of having to perform in some format, you know, occasionally your mind is on different things.
No. You can't get away with it, Tom. You were definitely giving the impression you're far too lofty to engage with reality television.
Well,
you're just trying to prove that you're a great.
Give me a break. I just couldn't remember the name of it.
Okay. Yes, I did.
I think you're trying to avoid answering the question.
I am. Believe me, I'm trying to avoid answering the question. I did about 4 years ago. Yeah. And you're going to ask me why, and I'm going to say it was really complicated and very idealistic. I did it for the money.
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask you why, but I was going to ask you if you enjoyed it.
Oh, Christ, no, absolutely not. No. Oh, God. I mean, you've never seen the program, of course, but no. it's predicated on the ethos and indeed the techniques of the Gestapo and the NKVD. You know, you're deprived of everything, including sensory things and food and all that sort of stuff. You're tortured at regular intervals. In this case, for the entertainment of the television public. Did I enjoy it? Good Lord, no. It's a bit ghastly. You're starved. You're made to eat, you know, sort of ghastly sexual appendages of horrible animals, and you know, I was strapped to a wheel and pelted with cockroaches and dunked in a tank full of predatory fish. I mean,
was there an element of pride though? But were you proud to have, you know, got through it and that kind of thing?
But definitely. Well, I suppose so. I mean, it was an ordeal, and the grandchildren were terribly impressed. So I suppose that's a bit of a plus point.
Mm. We were talking about the the moral maze and how you've had so many interesting things to discuss, especially this last year. Do you ever feel like you want to wade in? I mean, as the sort of chair of the programme, you I guess you're not meant to, but have you ever felt like you really need to get your piece out?
I suppose the answer has to be yes, but I don't know. I've worked for the BBC for 51 years now, and I very much grew up in the BBC in when the culture was that nobody must know what the BBC reporter or anchor person or chairman or whatever it is. Nobody must know what they think. The thing that would have most mortified me as a BBC television news reporter or a television news sort of presenter, anchorman, newscaster, whatever you like to call it, was if anybody thought they knew how I voted, for instance. I think things are not quite as I think the BBC still does a good job, but are not quite as stern. And it's very difficult for BBC correspondents to go on Twitter and so on without some of their own personal feelings obtruding, which I think it has to be acknowledged as a bit of a difficulty. But I think it's important, if you're in the chairman role or in the dispassionate reporter's role, that people don't know what your views are. So I struggle to contain it. But do people come on that particular programme and say things that I profoundly disagree with? Well, panellists I often personally profoundly disagree with, but try hard not to show it. Unsuccessfully, I'm told, on some occasions.
Have you? When have you let it slip? What your thoughts were?
Well, of course, I think I never have, but my friends say they can hear my voice curdling.
But you have, on other occasions, you have been happy to sort of share your opinions and thoughts. Would it be fair to put you in the, they do these TV programs of the grumpy old man kind of thing. I mean, you're obviously far too young for that, but otherwise, are you happy to be placed in that category?
I remember doing a grumpy old man program. I'm not quite sure whether it was that's it, but it was the same thing. It was an opinion piece that was about, I suppose, I mean, it's a completely fashionable and ordinary thought now, but at the time it wasn't, that kind of men were losing it, and it was, as all television, it was a combination of some interesting and deeper thoughts about the role of males in a kind of post-industrial society, with a lot of frippery. Television goes into it, metrosexuals and moisturizer and all that sort of nonsense. And I was happy to do that because I thought I thought it was important to do not a polemical piece, but a fairly opinionated piece about men's roles and how men were accommodating a different and probably much fairer world. But I made the mistake of trusting an interviewer. And a magazine, you have to do these things to promote the program. And a magazine interviewer rang me up and said, what's your thesis and all that kind of stuff. And I went on about it like this, and he was obviously very, very bored. And then he says, but what's your proof that women are taking over? And it wasn't about women taking over. It was about men losing a role or being more diffident about their roles and so on. And of course, in a moment of complete stupidity, I said, well, look at the BBC, for instance. Every single creative head job was at that particular point done by a woman. Incidentally, in every case, an extremely talented woman who, controller BBC One, BBC Two, Radio 4, managing director television, managing director radio. They're all women. Director General wasn't. But all the people who are actually making the big decisions about programs were women, you see. And I thought, QED proved my point, And when the magazine came out, it had been pitched as that I was complaining about the BBC, how the BBC was now run by women, you see. And even worse, the article was written in the first person, as if it was me that had written it. And the world fell in. And this was, before Twitter storms really took off, but the world fell in. Every member of the female commentariat lined up. I was a crippled Lancaster bomber, and they were all kind of Messerschmitts lining up to shoot me down. And it was a very uncomfortable feeling at the time. So I know exactly how people at the centre of these Twitter storms now must feel.
But you survived it. I mean, because when I read about this, I was surprised. If I think if it happened now, I'm not sure you would survive it. This was it 2005 or?
Yeah, it probably was about 2005. I survived it because the program came out. And,
right, that showed your real views.
Was in a completely different focus. Right. So the whole thing evaporated then. I don't think it would now, you see. I mean, I think the other interesting issues is that's around is how pernicious social media are, really, and what a viper's den, what a sad reflection what you see on the social media so often, not all the time, and the wonders of the internet and all that, but so often the latent nastiness, the irrationality, the bullying, the ganging together, and even worse in this particular context, the idea that what actually happened doesn't matter. The truth doesn't matter, facts don't matter. It's what people think they heard or how they feel rather than anything else. All of which I think is quite dangerous.
Do you worry about that in the context of COVID vaccines and that kind of thing, that it will put people off?
I suppose there's a possibility if these things get mushroom along, but I don't know. I mean, what's your view? Maybe I don't mix in those particular circles, but I haven't come across anyone who doesn't want it.
I think it's interesting because there's certainly a lot of noise on, in the Twitterati, etc., in terms of vaccine hesitancy, anti-vaccine, etc. And when the surveys were done, they did show quite small numbers of people saying they definitely would not take it, quite large numbers of people saying they weren't sure. But I think actually as things have moved on and more people have got vaccinated, I know of work colleagues who were not sure, it's a new vaccine, it's only seems to have come around quite quickly. But then once everyone else is getting vaccinated and is absolutely fine 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, a month later, that is sort of speaking volumes. And so I hope that for that reason, some of these concerns about not enough people getting vaccinated will not come
I mean, stepping back a bit and looking at that, I would draw a moral and intellectual distinction between those people who are deeply concerned about the vaccine because they quite rationally feel, maybe wrongly, but rationally feel, so it's a rational view to hold, that perhaps the approval process has been rushed, and therefore it might present a potential danger. Not a view I take at all, but that seems to be a rational thing, as opposed to those people who think there's some deep state conspiracy to plant microchips in you, which is irrational. I draw a distinction between those two things.
Yeah, that's I guess the difference between the hesitants, the vaccine hesitants, and the anti-vaxxers. I'll give you an opportunity. If you have any more questions you wanted to ask me, now's your chance before we get Holly back in for some more comments from.
No, I just detected trends of something else that worries me in your idea of the anti-vaxxers. There's a kind of there's a sort of faint heresy whiff about it. I suppose the other thing that I found, particularly as I chair a program about argument and debate and fierce debate often too, is this idea that that rational debate and giving people the opportunity to present their point of view, even if it's opposed to yours, is under threat on all sorts of different levels, and this growing idea that seems to be taking hold that if somebody disagrees with you, then they're not just wrong, but they are in some sense evil.
But I
when worry you say about that too.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I say the anti-vaxxers and you say it sounds like heresy, you mean, are you critical of me for using that term?
No, because I know the terms on which you're doing it, but you know what I mean? It's the vaccine deniers. I suppose if you'd have said deniers, that would have been a more clear cut, rather like the climate change deniers, which are eliding, views about how to cope with climate change, or even perhaps views about what the principal causes are. They're rather less defensible. It's eliding that with some sort of heresy.
But I mean, that's these are the issues that the BBC and other broadcasters have really struggled with, isn't it? How much you want rational debate, etc. You want people to be able to debate, but when there is no debate, or the kind of evidence that's being brought in isn't really evidence at all, do you allow that to have equal airtime? And I think the feeling is with climate change that people are not giving now such a voice to views which denying climate change. I don't think the vaccine issue is quite there yet. I don't know. It's hard to know.
But is it? I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm playing devil's advocate here because it's not what I personally think. But if I was playing devil's advocate to say that, okay, so the climate's changing, it always changes. Okay, it's because of human influence and what humans are doing, which seems perfectly clear to me. But is there no upside to climate change? I'd find it very difficult, I think, to think of a newspaper article or a piece on television that kind of said, well, this might do an awful lot of harm, but actually there are quite a few things that might be improved by more carbon in the atmosphere. I don't know, crop production or things like that. You look at the kind of Trump phenomenon and populism across the world, and think of the more extreme people and their unease as rather foreign in a way, but that unease is people getting into their idea that certain views are being quashed, certain attitudes are just not allowed. I just prefer open debate, I suppose, is what I mean. So these things at least come out and then can be debated and to be shown not to be the case, rather than the idea of cancelling people, of suppressing something that you don't like or makes you feel uncomfortable, or even you think is counterproductive. Because I think in the long run, you end up with people being suspicious about what they're told and what they're hearing, and leading to some of the other problems we've been discussing.
It pushes people to more extremes, doesn't it? I wondered for a moment there whether we were getting our scoop. Michael Buerk says we should see the upside to climate change.
No, I have no idea.
You heard it, ladies and gentlemen. They heard it.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Anyway, let's get Holly in.
Another bad moment.
Yeah, don't worry. We only have tens of thousands. It's not the millions of you'd be used to.
Oh, but they grow.
Holly, what are they saying in the Twitter sphere?
So this actually links into what you were talking about then with the vaccines. So this is from Kevin Devine on Zoom, and he's asking, should care home staff who refuse to be vaccinated be sacked?
Well, let me put that to Michael Buerk, because he hosted a moral maze on that question on vaccination. I was on it, but let's hear what his view is.
I'm not allowed to have any views, Tom. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I think that's given the heroic things care home staff have been doing, particularly during this. It seems pretty harsh. But I would have thought one of the essential qualifications for somebody working in a care home is that they don't they don't pose an existential threat to the people they're working with. It sounds extremely harsh to me, but perhaps if they, for whatever reason, don't feel they want a vaccination, they should perhaps look for a more appropriate occupation.
Thank you. Aren't there precedents, Holly, within the NHS in terms of things like hepatitis B vaccination, etc.?
Well, certainly within our lab, there are certain things that we have to be vaccinated against, or if not, it would obviously prevent us from doing certain types of work. But there are people in our hospital that I know who have chosen not to be vaccinated, and obviously they're not going to get sacked or anything like that, because it is down to personal choice. But I think they are trying to encourage people as much as possible, but obviously you can't force people. Mm-hmm. So have we got time for another question?
Yeah, it would be good to have one for Michael, if you can, one of those. If you could.
Well, there was a kind of light-hearted one that I thought would be good to end on for Michael. So this was from Kathy from Zoom, and she's asking, why did Michael go into journalism, and what was your most embarrassing moment?
Well, I went into journalism because I couldn't think of anything else to do. Originally at school, I thought partly because my mother died when I was 15, and I didn't have a father, so this was even more of a blow. And in the wake of which, I rather got the idea of wanting to become a doctor. But was heroically unqualified for it. I started doing sciences at A-level. Oh dear, my word. What a difference between O-level, what GCSEs used to be called, and A-level. I could manage, physics, chemistry, biology at O-level, but as soon as you move to A-level, I could speaking in a foreign language. So as an 18-year-old failure, I had to look round for something to do, and I at the time it was the 60s and the sexual revolution was going on, and I wasn't getting any, and I thought I thought the reason was that I didn't have any sort of attractive, racy sounding job. So I looked around and I thought, now what sounds stylish and dashing and fashionable? I know, I'll be a newspaper reporter. So I was lucky and became a newspaper reporter, and it didn't do me any good on that wider issue at all, I have to say.
Well, I think we can all be thankful anyway that you did become a newspaper reporter and journalist, and ultimately
definitely not a doctor. You mean
work with the BBC? You might say that. I couldn't possibly comment. But thank you, Michael. Thank you, Holly. Let me just do my closing credits, as it were. First of all, to say to people, this is our first one where we've just had one guest. So post comments now in the chat, give us some feedback and tell us your thoughts on that. And then also, of course, go onto your podcast, your favourite podcast, to find the Scouse Science Podcast, and you can listen to Michael there if you missed some of this today, or any of our previous guests. And our next one is next month, and I can't remember who it is or the date or the time, but you'll all hear about it because we have your email details. And also, just to say to Michael and Holly, of course, because Michael, I forgot to say this at the start, we have a little green room afterwards. So if you look in your diary, there'll be a different link you can click just for our post-mortem debrief, sherry, and all the rest of it. But that's us just about done now. So once again, I'd like to thank Michael and Holly Ellis, and we'll say goodbye. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.